I still remember the burning sensation on my cheek that afternoon. Alice had just slapped me in the middle of a family barbecue, in front of my wife, in front of our relatives, and most importantly, in front of my two daughters. I did not hit her back, and I did not raise my voice. I simply stood there looking at my sister-in-law and realized that 17 years of silence had just ended in a way no one in the family could have imagined. My name is Kyle Weber. I was 49 years old at the time. I lived in Austin and ran an IT company I had spent years building. Business was good, our finances were stable, and from the outside, my life looked almost ideal. But if you asked me what mattered most, the answer was never the company or the money in the bank. It was always Alana and our two daughters. Alana is 6 years younger than I am. We had been together long enough to live through both the easy years and the kinds of seasons that truly test a marriage. The hardest one came when we learned that she could not carry a pregnancy. It took Alana a long time to accept that reality, but to me, her ability to have a child had never determined the value of our marriage. After many conversations, we decided to adopt. Alexa came into our lives first. She was 12 when this story happened, serious, quiet, and always the kind of child who thought carefully before doing anything. 3 years after Alexa, we adopted Kesha. She was completely different from her sister, full of energy, constantly talking, and capable of turning a quiet room into chaos within minutes. I never saw them as children we brought home, because we could not have biological children. Alexa and Kesha were simply my daughters. I was the one who drove them to school, sat beside their beds when they were sick, attended school performances I barely understood, and became the first person they came to whenever something was wrong. To me, that was what being a father meant. But Alice, Alana's older sister, had never really looked at our family that way. From the beginning of my marriage to Alana, Alice made it clear that she thought her sister could have done better. Her husband, Ray, was doing very well in real estate at the time. He made good money, drove expensive cars, and showed up at family gatherings with stories about his latest deals. Alice was proud of Ray and often found ways to compare him to me. My company was still growing in those years, so whenever we met, Alice would ask questions that sounded polite, but were really meant to measure how successful I was. She once asked whether my computer business was stable enough to take care of Alana. Another time, she joked that at least with Ray's job, people could actually see where the money came from. I usually let it go. Not because I failed to understand what she was doing, but because I did not want Alana to feel caught between her husband and her sister. I knew the two of them had their differences, but Alana still loved Alice, and I thought a few ugly comments were not worth turning into a family war. For years, that was how I dealt with Alice. Then Ray's life began moving in the opposite direction. A series of professional violations damaged his real estate career. The large commissions disappeared, while the family's expenses remained almost exactly the same. They still had a large mortgage, expensive cars, and their son, Tom, was still attending a private school that cost more than most families could comfortably afford. One evening, Alana told me Alice was in trouble. They were short on the mortgage and were at risk of missing payments. Alana wanted to help her sister, but she did not want to make the decision alone because our finances were shared. I agreed almost immediately. I did not like Alice, but that did not mean I wanted to watch her family lose their home. Ray was struggling, and I believed they only needed some time to recover. The first payment went out, then came another. Then there was Tom's tuition. Each time, Alice called Alana, and Alana spoke to me. I kept agreeing because we could afford to help, and because I knew it mattered to my wife. The problem was that Ray never truly recovered. What had started as temporary support slowly became part of their normal finances. For years, I contributed to their mortgage and Tom's tuition without ever asking to be repaid. Alice did not know. She always assumed Alana was the one helping her. I never corrected that assumption. I never asked Alana to tell her sister that most of the money came from income generated by my company. As far as I was concerned, If the family stayed at peace, it did not matter who got the credit. But that peace only worked in one direction. Alice continued looking down on me. There were dinners where she thanked Alana for helping her, then turned around and asked whether my business was struggling. I knew the truth. Alana knew the truth. Still, I let it pass. I told myself I was keeping the peace. In reality, I was teaching Alice that the way she treated me would never have consequences. What made things worse was how often she brought children into her comments. She never directly said Alexa and Kesha were not real family, but she constantly said things that made it clear. She drew a line between biological children and adopted ones. Once, Alice said we were lucky to have found two children who fit us so well. Another time, while talking about Tom, she said only people with biological children truly understood the instinct a parent had to protect their own. I heard all of it, and I stayed silent. There was one thing Alice did not know. Alana's family believed that the reason we could not have children was me. I had never corrected them because the truth was that Alana was the one with fertility problems. After the doctors confirmed it, she was devastated. The last thing I wanted was for her to answer invasive questions from relatives or endure pity every time the family gathered. So when everyone began assuming the problem was mine, I simply let them believe it. Alana once asked whether it bothered me. I told her no. If a misunderstanding could spare the woman I loved even a little more pain, I saw no reason to correct it. Unfortunately, Alice treated that silence as another reason to look down on me. I endured it for years because I still believed that keeping a family stable mattered more than winning an argument. Until the barbecue in Round Rock. There was nothing unusual about that day at first. I drove there with Alana, Alexa, and Kesha. The girls argued in the back seat about something I no longer remember. We arrived in the early afternoon, greeted everyone, and settled into the gathering the way we had dozens of times before. Ray was there with Alice and Tom. I did not avoid them, but I also did not make any effort to spend time with them. I had become very good at keeping enough distance to get through family gatherings without problems. For about an hour, everything was normal. I was standing near the grill talking with a few relatives. Alana was on the other side of the yard. Alexa and Kesha were playing with the other kids, including Tom. Then I heard someone running toward me. When I turned around, I saw Kesha. She ran straight into my arms, her eyes red and tears running down her face. She did not look like a child who had simply lost an argument over a game. Kesha looked genuinely hurt. I crouched down as soon as she reached me. Alexa appeared a few seconds later. She was not crying, but the tension in her face told me this was not something small. Kesha grabbed my arm. I asked who had made her cry. It took her a few seconds to answer. Then she said Tom's name. At that moment, I still did not know exactly what he had said. I also did not know that only minutes later, Alice would walk over, slap me in front of my daughters, and end 17 years of me trying to preserve peace with her family. I only knew one thing. Someone had just hurt my daughter, and this time, I was not going to stay silent. It took Kesha a while to explain what had happened. She still clung tightly to my arm, tears running down her cheeks, while Alexa stood just behind her with a tense expression. I asked again what had happened and kept my voice calm so Kesha would not become even more upset. She told me Tom had called both girls charity cases. He said Alexa and Kesha were not really part of the family because they were adopted, and that Alana and I had only brought them home because we could not have children of our own. I looked at Alexa. She confirmed that Tom had said it in front of several other children and kept going even after she told him to stop. Kesha was more deeply hurt than I had realized, because at 9 years old, words like that can quickly become questions about whether you truly belong. I did not want to turn it into a huge argument in front of the children. I only wanted Tom to understand that there were lines he was not allowed to cross. I took Alexa and Kesha with me to find him. Tom was standing on the other side of the yard. I called him aside and asked directly whether what Kesha had told me was true. He was silent for a few seconds before admitting it, but instead of apologizing, he said he was only telling the truth. That answer made me realize those words had not come entirely from a child's imagination. I told Tom that Alexa and Kesha carried the Weber name, that they were my daughters, and that they belonged to this family every bit as much as anyone else. I also told him he was never to use their adoption to humiliate them again. I did not shout. I did not threaten him. But before Tom could answer, Alice appeared. She walked toward me quickly, already angry, and immediately demanded that I stay away from her son. She did not ask why Kesha was crying. She did not ask what Tom had said. In her mind, the fact that I was confronting her son automatically meant I was the problem. I explained what had happened. Alice immediately minimized it, saying Tom was only a child and that I was overreacting to a few words. She also said I had no right to corner her son, just because he had said something I did not like. I told her this was not about what I liked. Tom had deliberately told my daughters they were not real family, and I was not going to allow that to continue. Alana had joined us by then. I saw her expression change the moment she understood what had happened. She pulled Kesha closer and asked Alice why she was defending Tom when he was clearly the one who had caused the problem. Alice did not answer. Instead, she turned toward me. She said I was always too sensitive whenever anyone mentioned adoption. According to her, I was turning a childish comment into a major issue because I could not handle the truth. I asked her what truth she meant. Alice looked directly at me and said the thing she had only hinted at before. She said I was not a real father. Several people nearby began to go quiet. I looked at her without answering. She continued, saying I could not understand a real father's instinct because Alexa and Kesha were not biologically mine. Then she went further and said I had never even been able to give Alana a real family. I felt Alana freeze behind me. Alice had no idea that for years, the entire family had misunderstood why we did not have biological children. The person who could not carry a pregnancy was Alana. After receiving that diagnosis, she had spent a long time dealing with the shame and pain that came with it. I did not want my wife forced to explain something so private to anyone, so when the family began assuming the problem was me, I did not correct them. I let them believe it because it spared Alana questions she did not want to answer. Alice had taken that silence and turned it into an insult. Alana told her to stop, but Alice was no longer listening. She stepped closer to me, and before I understood what she was about to do, her hand came across my face. The slap echoed through the yard. My head turned to the side. Everything around us went almost completely silent. I turned back toward Alice, then looked at my daughters. Kesha stood frozen. Alexa pulled her sister close, and both of them were staring at me. That look was enough to keep me from reacting out of anger. Alana was not as calm. She immediately stepped forward and demanded to know what the hell Alice thought she was doing. I had to put a hand on Alana's arm because I did not want this turning into another physical confrontation in front of the girls. I looked at Alice and told her she had 10 seconds to leave before I called the police. Alice did not move. I started counting 10. She stared at me as if she could not believe I was serious. 9. That was when Ray stepped between us. He told me to calm down and not turn a family issue into a police matter. I reminded him that his wife had just slapped me in front of my daughters, but Ray still tried to justify it. Then he said Alice was only a mother protecting her child. I looked at him for several seconds. That sentence made everything clear. For years, Alice and Ray had always had a reason for their behavior. When they struggled, someone else was supposed to help. When they insulted someone, the other person was supposed to let it go. Even after Alice hit me, I was still expected to be the reasonable one, to keep the peace. I had done that for too long. I told Alana to take Alexa and Kesha to the car. Before leaving, I told Alice that, from that point on, she was not to come near my daughters unless either Alana or I gave permission. I did not argue with Ray anymore. I did not call the police from the barbecue. I simply left. The drive back to Austin was almost completely silent. In the rearview mirror, I could see Alexa holding Kesha's hand. Alana sat beside me, still furious but quiet. The red mark on my cheek was not what bothered me most. What I kept thinking about was the question the girls might now be asking themselves. When we got home, I took them upstairs. Kesha finally asked whether Tom had been right. She wanted to know if she and Alexa were really my daughters, or just children we had adopted, because we could not have biological ones. I sat beside her and told her she was my daughter. Alexa was my daughter, and that had never depended on blood. I told her family was built by the people who chose to stay, care, and protect one another. Kesha hugged me before finally agreeing to go to sleep. I went downstairs and found Alana sitting at the kitchen table. We said very little. We both understood that what had happened in Round Rock had crossed a line we could no longer pretend did not exist. I opened my laptop and logged into our bank account. The first payment was the recurring transfer we used to help Alice and Ray with their mortgage. I canceled it. The second was the money we had been contributing toward Tom's tuition. I canceled that too. Alana watched me but did not stop me. I was not doing it to punish a child. Tom was not responsible for his family's finances. But I was no longer willing to let Alice and Ray treat my money as something they were automatically entitled to receive. For 17 years, I had believed keeping the peace meant being patient. I had ignored insults, protected truths that did not need to be shared, and quietly helped them whenever they struggled. That night, I finally understood the mistake I had made. I had not taught Alice and Ray to appreciate help. I had only taught them that no matter what they did, I would always be standing behind them, cleaning up the consequences. After the slap in Round Rock, that ended. For the first time in 17 years, I was not going to protect Alice from what she had done. For 2 weeks after the barbecue in Round Rock, I barely communicated with Alice or Ray. I did not call asking for an apology, and I did not explain why the payments had stopped. I had said enough the day Alice slapped me. The rest I wanted them to face for themselves. Life in our house slowly returned to normal. Alexa and Kesha went back to school. Alana returned to her routine, and I focused on the company. I did not want Alice's behavior to keep taking time away from the family I was supposed to be protecting. The quiet only lasted a few days. Ray started calling when he realized the mortgage support had not arrived. I ignored the first call. By the third, he left a message asking whether there had been some kind of banking problem. Then he understood. The next message was no longer a question. Ray said I was letting a family argument interfere with important payments and demanded that I call him back so we could fix it. I did not respond. None of that money had ever been my obligation. I had helped because I wanted to help, but after years of receiving it, Ray had apparently forgotten the difference between kindness and responsibility. Alice started calling Alana too. She kept calling until Alana finally agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Austin. Alana said she wanted to speak to her sister alone, so I stayed out of it. When she came home, she told me almost everything that had happened. Alice had not come to apologize. She had come because of the money. Almost immediately, she criticized me for stopping the mortgage payments and Tom's tuition. She said I was using money for revenge and tried to frame herself as the victim of what had happened in Round Rock. What angered Alana most was that Alice barely mentioned the slap. In Alice's mind, the biggest problem was not that she had hit me in front of 2 children. The problem was that after she hit me, the money stopped. Alice even told Alana she should not allow her husband to control how she helped her own family. That was when Alana asked her a question. Where did Alice think all that money had come from? Alice answered as if the truth were obvious. She believed Alana had been helping her with her own money. Alana told her she was wrong. The mortgage payments, the support during Ray's unemployment, and most of Tom's tuition had come from our joint account. Every time Alice needed help, Alana had spoken to me before transferring anything, and every time I had agreed. At first, Alice did not believe her. Alana had to walk her through the different periods when we had helped. When Ray lost income, I agreed to help with the mortgage. When they fell short on Tom's tuition, I agreed again. When a few difficult months turned into years, I kept helping. I had never asked Alice to thank me. I had never even asked her to know. Alana told her the reason was simple. I knew she loved her sister and did not want to see Alice lose her home. Alice went quiet. But instead of apologizing, she tried to change the subject. She said that even if the money came from me, I had still overreacted in Round Rock. She kept insisting that I was too sensitive about adoption and about the fact that we did not have biological children. That was when Alana decided to reveal the secret we had kept for years. She looked at Alice and told her the person who could not have children was not me. It was her, according to Alana. Alice barely reacted for the first few seconds. She just stared at her sister. Alana explained that after the doctors confirmed she could not carry a pregnancy, she had gone through an extremely difficult period. She did not want every family gathering to become a conversation about treatment, babies, or pity. I had agreed to keep it private. When everyone assumed the problem was me, I never corrected them. I did not need them to know the truth, if telling it meant putting more pressure on Alana. But for years, Alice had used that assumption as another reason to look down on me. In Round Rock, she had even told Alana that I could not give her a real family. For the first time, Alice understood that the man she had used that insult against was the same man who had quietly protected her sister's dignity for years. Alana said the conversation nearly ended there. But for me, the truth coming out did not mean the story was over. Right after the barbecue, I had contacted an attorney. Alice had slapped me in front of multiple witnesses. I had no reason to continue treating that as a private family dispute that everyone should simply forget. I asked the attorney to move forward with the appropriate steps regarding the assault. That was the first move. The second involved Ray. Years earlier, when Ray's finances began collapsing, I had agreed to be a guarantor during the restructuring of their mortgage. At the time, I thought I was simply helping the family buy more time. After Round Rock, I no longer wanted my name tied to that loan. I asked my attorney to review the paperwork. During that review, we found problems with the income Ray had reported when applying for the restructuring. The numbers did not match the financial reality I knew he had been living with at the time. I did not jump to conclusions. I let the attorney investigate. Once the inconsistencies were confirmed, I decided to notify the bank. At the same time, I started the process of removing myself from the guarantee. I knew it could have serious consequences for Alice and Ray. Without my financial support, they were unlikely to maintain the mortgage the way they had been. But I had not created the problem. Ray had submitted the information. Ray had borrowed the money. Alice and Ray had chosen to maintain a lifestyle they could not afford. I was simply no longer standing behind them to absorb the consequences. A few days later, Ray called again. This time, I answered. His voice no longer sounded like the angry messages he had left before. He said we needed to meet and resolve everything before the situation went too far. He suggested dinner, just the four of us, me, Alana, Alice, and Ray. No children, no relatives. Ray called it a reconciliation. He chose the Oasis, the restaurant overlooking Lake Travis where our family had once celebrated special occasions. I told him I would think about it and hung up. That evening, I told Alana about the invitation. She asked whether I wanted to go. I said yes. I was not going because I wanted to argue with Alice again. I was not expecting a sincere apology either. I was going because there were things they needed to understand. Alice needed to know the slap in Round Rock had not disappeared just because 2 weeks had passed. Ray needed to know I had found problems in the mortgage documents, and both of them needed to understand that the years of me quietly solving their problems were over. Before the dinner, my attorney sent me the documents I needed. I placed them in a briefcase. One set concerned the assault, the other concerned the mortgage. I had no idea what Alice and Ray had prepared for that dinner. Maybe they thought a few apologies, a reminder about Tom, and a speech about family would be enough to make me give in like I always had. If so, they had badly misread the situation. For 17 years, they had known a Kyle Weber who always chose peace over consequences. The man who walked into the oasis that night was still me. Only one thing had changed. I was no longer there to protect them. That evening, Alana and I arrived at the oasis on time. The restaurant sat high above Lake Travis, a place our family had once chosen for happy occasions. But this time, no one was there to celebrate. Elise and Ray were already waiting. The moment I saw them, I could tell their attitude had changed. Alice no longer carried her usual arrogance, while Ray was trying to look calm despite clearly being under pressure. We sat down. For the first few minutes, Ray tried to behave as if this were a normal family dinner. He asked about my company, then asked Alana how Alexa and Kesha were doing. I answered briefly. I was not there to pretend everything was fine. Eventually, Alice brought up what had happened in Round Rock. She said she had been thinking about it a lot and admitted she should not have allowed things to go that far. She said she had lost control because she saw me speaking harshly to Tom, then she apologized. But the apology quickly turned into a list of excuses. Ailey said everyone had been emotional that day, that Tom was only a child, and that she had reacted instinctively as a mother. She also said I had made things worse by threatening to call the police. I listened until she finished. Then I asked one question. Are you sorry because you slapped me? Or because I stopped paying your bills? Alice went silent. Ray immediately stepped in. He said we should not turn dinner into an interrogation. According to him, both sides had made mistakes, and the important thing now was finding a way to return the family to normal. I looked at him and asked what mistake I had made. Ray did not answer directly. He changed the subject to Tom. He said cutting the tuition was hurting a child who had nothing to do with the conflict between adults. He argued that no matter how angry I was with Alice, Tom did not deserve to lose his school because of it. I asked who had decided to enroll Tom in a school his parents could not afford. Ray stared at me. I told him I had helped for years because I chose to help, not because I had ever agreed to raise their son for them. The atmosphere at the table changed. Alice said I was using money to punish her family. I reminded her that the money had never belonged to her. For years, Alice had not even known who was really behind the support. She had been able to look down on me, mock my work, and even insult me about children, while accepting money from the same man she thought was not good enough for her sister. Alice lowered her eyes. I knew Alana had already told her the truth about the fertility issue. There was no need to bring it up again. What mattered now was the slap. I opened the briefcase beside my chair and pulled out the first set of papers. I placed them on the table, in front of Alice. She looked down, but did not understand immediately. I told her I had been working with an attorney and had moved forward with the legal process regarding the assault in Round Rock. Alice looked up sharply. Ray asked whether I was serious. I told him I was completely serious. There were multiple witnesses who had seen Alice hit me. Alana had been standing right there. Other relatives had seen it too. I did not need any exaggerated story. I only needed the truth. Ailey started to panic. She said we were family, and that this was not serious enough to involve the law. She promised she would apologize properly if that was what I wanted. I told her that if she had truly been sorry, the apology would have come before she knew I had filed anything. Ray started losing patience. He accused me of destroying the relationship between Alana and Alice because I wanted revenge. Alana spoke for the first time in several minutes. She told Ray that I was not the one who had destroyed that relationship. Alice had done it when she slapped my husband in front of 2 children, and then never once asked whether those children were okay. Ray said nothing. I still had another set of documents. I pulled them from the briefcase. This time, the moment Ray saw the heading, his expression changed. He knew what they were. Alice did not. She turned toward her husband and asked what was happening. I explained it for him. While reviewing the mortgage, where I had once served as guarantor, my attorney had discovered that the income Ray reported during the restructuring did not match his actual financial situation. Ray immediately said the situation was more complicated than I understood. I told him maybe it was. That was why I had not made the decision myself. I had let the bank review it. Elise turned toward Ray. She asked what I was talking about. Ray avoided answering. I continued. The bank had been notified about the inconsistencies, and I had taken the necessary steps to remove myself from the guarantee. That was when Alice finally understood. She asked what that meant for the house. I did not soften the answer. Without my guarantee and continued support, they could not maintain the mortgage under the existing terms. With the issues now uncovered in the paperwork, the bank was moving forward with the next stage. Foreclosure proceedings would begin Monday. Alice stared at me as if she had misheard. Ray sat completely still. For several seconds, no one said anything. Then Alice began to cry. She said the house was where Tom had grown up and that they could not lose it. She promised to apologize to Alexa and Kesha, apologize to me in front of the whole family, and admit she had been wrong about everything. 2 weeks earlier, those words might have made me hesitate, but the timing told me everything. I asked Alice why she was only willing to do those things now. She had no answer. I already knew it. Alice had not changed when she saw Kesha crying. She had not changed after she slapped me. She had not changed after learning that I had protected Alana for years. She only changed when she realized she was about to lose the house. Ray slammed his hand against the table and said I was trying to destroy his family. I looked at him. I reminded him of the words he had used in Round Rock. Alice was only a mother protecting her child. Ray went silent. I told him that if he wanted to talk about parental responsibility, we could. A real father understands whether he can afford the life he is providing for his family. A real father does not misrepresent income and then expect someone else to remain his guarantor forever. And a real father thinks about consequences before those consequences fall on his child. Ray said I was a father too, and should understand what he had been trying to do for Tom. I told him that being a father was exactly why I was sitting there. My daughters had been humiliated. They had watched their aunt slap their father. Then the only adult on Alice's side who could have stopped things had stood there and told me not to overreact. I was not going to teach Alexa and Kesha that being family meant tolerating anything, simply because the person hurting them shared blood with someone we loved. Alice was still crying. She asked whether there was any way I could call the bank and fix everything. I told her no. I had spent 17 years fixing things for them. Whenever they were short on money, we helped. Whenever Alice crossed a line, I stayed quiet. Whenever Ray got into trouble, I gave him more time. I had done enough. Alice said she would change. I believed that in that moment, she genuinely wanted to believe her own words. But I was no longer willing to put my family in the position of waiting to see how long that promise lasted. I closed the briefcase. Dinner was over. Ray looked at me and asked if I was really going to abandon them like this. I told him I was not abandoning anyone. I was simply no longer paying for the consequences of choices they had made themselves. Alana stood up with me. Elise called her sister's name. Alana paused for a few seconds. She said she still loved Alice because they were sisters, but love did not mean protecting someone from every consequence forever. Then she walked out with me. We left the table and walked toward the parking lot. After a few steps, I looked at Alana. She looked back at me, and for the first time in weeks, we both started laughing. Not because Alice was about to lose her house, not because Ray was in trouble. We laughed because, for the first time in 17 years, neither of us was thinking about how Alice would feel about the decisions we made. We had spent too much time protecting her feelings. That night, we finally put that responsibility down. When we were almost at the car, I suddenly remembered something. Alice and Ray had invited us to the Oasis, and the dinner bill was still sitting on the table. This time, I did not go back to pay it. After dinner at the Oasis, I no longer communicated directly with Alice or Ray. Everything that needed to be said had been said, and from that point on, I let the attorney and the bank handle the rest. Alice thought I would change my mind after a few days. She asked several relatives to call Alana, hoping they could convince us to pull back. But this time, Alana did not step into the middle to make peace. She made it clear to the family that Alice had slapped me in front of our daughters and that we were no longer willing to reduce what happened to a simple disagreement between relatives. The assault case was resolved later, with testimony from the people who had witnessed what happened at the barbecue in Round Rock. Alice had very little room to deny it. In the end, she pleaded guilty to assault and was ordered to complete community service. A no-contact order was also put in place. For 14 months, Alice was not allowed near my family. I did not see that as a victory. What mattered to me was that Alexa and Kesha understood that when someone crossed a serious line, being related to them did not make the behavior acceptable. The house situation unfolded exactly as the attorney had predicted. Once the bank reviewed the paperwork, and I removed myself from the guarantee, Alice and Ray could no longer maintain the mortgage. The payments had already been difficult, and without our support, they became impossible. Eventually, the house was foreclosed. Alice, Ray, and Tom moved into a smaller rental apartment. The lifestyle they had maintained with someone else's money for years finally had to shrink to match what they could actually afford. Tom had to leave private school as well. He transferred to a public school in the area because Alice and Ray could no longer pay the tuition. When I heard about it, I did not feel happy. I still remembered that Tom was the one who had made Kesha run to me crying in Round Rock. But I also remembered that he was a child. Children do not naturally grow up believing adopted kids are worth less. They learn those ideas from adults. A few months later, a letter arrived at our house. It was from Tom. I thought about opening it first, but the envelope had Alexa and Kesha's names written on the front, so I gave it directly to them. The girls sat beside each other and read it. Tom apologized for what he had said at the barbecue. He admitted that calling Alexa and Kesha charity cases had been wrong, and that neither of them deserved to hear those words. He also said he had repeated things he had heard without really understanding how deeply those words could hurt someone. What stood out to me most was that Tom did not blame his parents. He did not try to make himself the victim. He simply apologized. Alexa finished reading first and handed the letter to me. I asked the girls what they wanted to do with it. Kesha said she was not as angry with Tom anymore. Alexa said that if he truly understood he had been wrong, she did not want to keep hating him. I kept the letter, not to remind myself of what had happened in Round Rock, but to remind myself that in the middle of all of this, Tom had never really been the villain. He was a child who had learned the wrong things from the adults around him. At least he had started correcting them. Our life slowly returned to normal too. There were no more calls asking for money, no more dinners where I had to sit through Alice's comments and pretend they did not bother me. More importantly, Alana no longer felt responsible for constantly solving her sister's problems. One evening, I was cleaning the kitchen when Kesha walked in. She sat on the stool near the counter and looked at me for a while before asking a question I knew had been in her mind for a long time. She asked whether we were a real family. I put down what I was holding and sat beside her. I told Kesha that we were the realest family I had ever known. I did not say it just to make her feel better. I believed it. Alexa and Kesha did not share my DNA, but I had watched the most important moments of their lives. I knew Alexa went quiet when she was sad, and Kesha talked more than usual when she was nervous. I knew what foods they loved, what frightened them, and what they dreamed of becoming someday. I had chosen to be their father from the beginning, and they had chosen me. No DNA test could make that relationship more real than it already was. I told Kesha that family was not decided by who gave birth to whom. Family was decided by who stayed when things became difficult, who protected one another when it mattered, and who continued choosing each other through everything. Kesha thought about it for a moment, then smiled. She hugged me and ran upstairs as if the question had never kept her awake. I sat alone in the kitchen for a while. 17 years earlier, I had believed being a good man meant knowing how to endure. I stayed quiet when Alice looked down on me. I let her believe I was the reason Alana could not have children. I quietly helped pay their mortgage and their son's tuition without asking for recognition. I thought I was protecting the family. Part of that was true. But I had made a mistake by failing to understand the difference between kindness and allowing someone to cross every boundary. The slap in Round Rock taught me that Alice did not lose her house because of me. Ray did not get into trouble because of me. I did not create their debt, misrepresent their income, or force Alice to raise her hand and strike me. I simply stopped standing between them and the consequences. That was the difference it took me 17 years to understand. I do not know what the future holds for Alice and Ray. I hope that one day they truly change, not because they need money or are afraid of losing something, but because they finally understand what they did. But that is no longer my responsibility. My responsibility is inside this house. Alana, Alexa, Kesha. My name is Kyle Weber. Alexis, Kesha are my daughters. Alana is my wife. That is my family. And I do not need anyone else to validate it. If 17 years of silence taught me anything, it is that a real father cannot protect everyone. Sometimes the most important thing a father can do is recognize who truly needs his protection. And even more importantly, he has to know when to stop protecting the wrong people.